Thanks very much for hanging out to the end of the day. I appreciate.
Do you want the lights down?
No, it's okay. You guys can see that, right? Perfect. So I'm going to talk to you today about AI. I'm going to talk to you about what I know, which is AI. My background is in aerospace engineering. So when I came out of school, and all my life growing up in Canada, I used to look at the big signs on the tall buildings downtown, and I thought, wow, those big companies must really have their act together. And when I graduated school and with a degree in aerospace, there's not much to do in aerospace in Canada, and I didn't want to go to the States, so I backed into this accidental career in big business, because when I realized those big companies really don't know what they're doing, I thought, I want to try to bring this math and science. Is this thing working? Your little pointer here is not working. You want to advance it for me? Go back one slide. There we go. So, I thought in engineering we use math and science all the time. It's the language of nature, so why not bring it to business? And I don't know anything about government and society except that I live in it, but maybe we should do what we do in business, what I've done for the last 25 years, and take it to the next level, and I'll dream about a possible future with you. Go to the next slide, please. This thing doesn't work. So I just want to first define AI. I think the terminology about statistics and analysis has moved faster than the technology. The vast majority of AI is just statistics. Linear regression was invented in 1805. Deep learning is just very sophisticated linear regression. If that was the panacea, the world would have changed already. Statistics is really, if you analyze historical data only, that's statistical analysis. You have examples of what's happened in the past. The limitation being you can only do what you did in the past. You can't do anything different. So maybe you might try to do the best you did in the past, but there's no way to do much better. If you only analyze the data that you historically collect to learn anything new, if you call learning just running a mathematical regression, you need to go collect new data. So you go do an experiment in the marketplace, you collect that data, you build some kind of mathematical model, and you learn at the pace of time. Not so interesting. We've done learning at the pace of time since the beginning of history. The other thing, there's no decision-making framework wrapped in a statistical model. So you build a model that says, this picture is an 80% probability of being a cat. Well, what do you do with that? Does that mean you run it over, you swerve your car? You're not sure what to do. There's no decision-making embedded. It's just a statistical model that gives you some kind of probabilistic label that this is a cat, not a cat, or it's a forecast of sales, or something like that. So what my definition of AI is, and really, I hate the term AI, it's just all math. There's no real intelligence in it. It's human-created intelligence put into software. Could you please go to the next slide? So all human decision-making, really, if you look in businesses, governments, systems, is about deciding, if I do this, what will happen? And this is really a reflection of human psychology. Our psyche is made up of, I want to constantly be in a better state. So if I'm hungry, I know if I eat, I will feel better. I won't be hungry anymore. I want to grow my business. I want to do better. So I want to figure out, what do I do to have the optimal outcome? And this is just engineering, first order, closed loop control theory. We wanted to decide what to do. There's a system, could be the human body, could be the economy, could be a company. And if I do this, I want to know what will happen, and I measure what happens, and I keep trying to do different things to get the best outcome. Next slide, please. So I'll give you what that's called reinforcement learning or optimal control. As children, you played with blocks, and you took a round block and you tried to put it in a square hole. You randomly tried different holes, eventually got it right through random trial and error. And then the second time you did it, you still didn't know, you did random trial and error. And through practice, you reinforced your learning. As you got better and better at it, that reinforcement parked into your memory banks, and then later on, you're able to recall that learning when you mastered the game of blocks. And as an adult, you know that a square-shaped screwdriver, you can put in a square-shaped whole, and that started a long time ago when you used to play with blocks. And so that's the motivation for what's called reinforcement learning, and that's how all biological entities in a planet, that's one modality of how they learn. And that's also very closely related to optimal control, or that control loop, which just tries to figure out, if I do this, what happens, right? And so that's what I would consider AI, or machine intelligence. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I'll give you an example of applying that to autonomous cars. You can't drive a car with a statistical model. You can't send a satellite to the far reaches of the solar system with the predictive model. You have to have a theory of the world. You wouldn't put a car on the road with an empty brain and have it learn on the fly and run people over and crash into things. You train it in a simulator. This means you have a simulation of the way the world works. And so with that simulation, you have no historical data to start with, because you don't have this driving experience. You have some historical parameters about how the world works, like the force of gravity. In the case of a race car, you might have the configuration of the racetrack, the friction of the rubber on the road, the air density, measurements like that that inform your simulation. And then through random trial and error, you figure out what is the optimal set of steering, brake, gas to achieve my long-term goal, which in the case of a racetrack is to get the fastest lap time. My reward, the fast lap time, is delayed from every instant, as opposed to statistics, where you want to get a reward on every record. In a statistical model, you can't say, I'm going to be inaccurate on these predictions, so I can do better on these other ones. In reinforcement learning, you can do that, because you don't want to drive fast around the corners. You want to stay on the road so you can get a faster overall lap time. So in this environment, the decision making is wrapped up right into the system. It makes decisions for you, decides what to do. In fact, you can learn faster than the pace of time. If your simulation is in a computer, you can do 100 million hours of driving in 1 hour. In fact, you can drive more than all of humanity has ever driven. If you did that, would it be surprising if you did better than people can do? Is it surprising that a computer be a human Go player? Google DeepMind, they had two computers play each other, random trial and error with reinforcement learning to figure out what worked and what didn't. In 3 days, they played more games than all of humankind ever played. Is it surprising that it won? Not really. That's reinforcement learning. It's math, and it's a powerful tool, and you don't have to repeat what you did in the past. You can find new patterns that improve what humanity can do. Next slide, please. So these complex system dynamics, if you have really complex system, these games I talked about, chess, Go, a self-driving car, are actually simple type systems. There's a finite number of decisions you can make. In a game of chess or Go, there's less than 100 options for any move you can make. Even in a self-driving car or robot, there's really a finite number of decisions. If you're steering a car, you have maybe 10 positions of steering, 10 positions of brake or gas. So it's a finite number of decisions. You can learn those simple systems from data. But when you have really complex systems like retail, for example, in retail, if you have 100,000 products in a typical store and you have to choose 2,000 to promote, there's 10 to the power of 3,600 possible combinations of products. That is more than the number of molecules in the universe. You can't learn that from data. These are complex systems. So the whole idea that you can learn anything from data is a myth. There's lots of correlations out there. Correlation is not causality. If Einstein waited for big data, we'd still be sitting here today. He actually used zero data to come up with the general theory of relativity, and it took 3 data points to validate that theory. Next slide, please. So here's an example. Why do you need a causal theory? I'll use orbital mechanics as I'm an aerospace guy. So in history, the Greeks thought that it was a geocentric universe and all the planets and stars rotated around the Earth, and they wanted to try to predict where the planets will be in the sky. And so you had the wrong theory, And on the graphs underneath, you can see in the bottom there, the vertical axis on the graph is the error, the horizontal axis is the volume of data. No matter how much data you collected, eventually the error rate doesn't change. You had the wrong theory. Then in the Middle Ages, they noticed that the planets did loops in the sky, did kind of like retrograde motion. So they invented this theory of epicycles, which is a terrible theory. Ptolemy did that. And the error rate was almost flat no matter how much data you collected. Then Copernicus came along and said it's a heliocentric universe and all the planets rotate around the sun in circular orbits. That was wrong. With a very little amount of data, you got to your error rate, and then no matter how much data you collected, you were wrong. Then along came Kepler, said it's elliptical orbits. With very little data, you got a very small error rate. No matter how much data you collect, that doesn't change. Einstein came along and he got it even more accurately correct, and it took 3 data points. So the idea that you can learn anything from data is wrong. You have to have the correct theory first. If you have the wrong theory, you will not, your statistical models won't work. And in every statistical model, there's an implicit theory, which is all the assumptions you didn't realize that you made that are not involved in the output. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you what we did in retail to build a fundamental theory of retail, what we applied. So in retail, there's some fundamental truths. You build theories from the fundamental truths that you know. And so in retail, customers don't buy products. Customers buy solutions or use cases. For example, if a grocer promotes a product like ground beef, you say, I'm going to go make an Italian dinner. Nobody eats just ground beef except my crazy uncle. He'll open the wrapper and stick a fork in it and eat it. But other than him, almost every other customer will buy a number of other products. For an Italian dinner, it's pasta, tomato sauce, cheese. For hamburgers, you're buying buns, condiments, produce, etc. So if you promote products with a large use case, the transactions will be bigger. Contrast that to a case of water. You don't need to buy any other products to consume water. So if a retailer promotes water, you will have smaller transactions. But then you have to net out all the negatives. We know that if you bought ground beef to make hamburgers, you didn't buy hot dogs, so hot dog sales will go down. In the halo of ground beef, if you made hamburgers, you bought hamburger buns, well, that cannibalizes hot dog buns, and hot dog bun sales go down. And because it's on sale, you forward bought and you stocked up on it, so you stole money from the future. Those ripple effects are almost infinite. You have 100,000 squared first-order ripples if you have 100,000 products. That's 10 billion possible interactive effects. And people buy different products at Christmas than they buy in the summertime. When you charge less for a product, people will buy more. If you promote it on TV or put it on the front page of your flyer, people will buy more. These are the fundamental truths. When I tell that to any retailer, they go, yeah, we know all of that. Well, we assemble it into a mathematical theory that we can simulate the future, and our engine considers billions and trillions of alternatives to find the most optimal combination of products, prices, and inventory allocations that you can drive. A year of retail is like a lap around a racetrack. A year of government is like a lap around a racetrack. The inputs to a retailer are the products you promote, the prices you charge, the inventory you allocate. Those are the core 3 decisions that determine the profitability of retail. And we can find combinations of products to promote that retailers have never done. In fact, every week they promote a combination that's never been done before. There are no historical labels in the business world. So the next slide. So this fundamentally works. So this is a graph from some of our customers. We have over 20 clients in 5 countries. So the graph shows the vertical axis is year over year same-store sales, which is how retailers measure themselves. And the red line is before Daisy came along. Most grocers are declining. Their revenues are shrinking. Grocery is a tough business, less than 1% net margin. So these businesses are declining. Post-hiring Daisy, because we help them make optimal decisions, we grow their sales. The difference between pre and post on average is 3 to 5%, which doesn't sound like much. If your kid came home with a 3 to 5% more on the report card, you wouldn't be too excited. But in retail, when you're a 1% net margin business, we just doubled your profit. That's unheard of. Doubled your profit, tripled your profit in some cases, just by doing something that's beyond human capability. It is beyond human capability to figure out the optimal combination of products, prices, and inventory allocations. That's what we should apply technology to. We shouldn't replace people and do what people do well. Let's do what people can't do. That's what we apply AI to. Next slide, please. So what have I learned in this exercise of the last 25 years of my life? First is that data veracity is critical. I'm a scientist, so I take it for granted that the data I collect is 100% accurate. Peter told me to weave this Globe and Mail article into my pitch, so I did. It was some article about Canada's small business tax rate should be repealed, and it talked about how StatsCan definition of small business is wrong because they include, a bank branch has less than 50 employees. Howard would know this, what the actual definition is. So you're including a bank branch or large corporate branches that are small in that definition. Well, how could you possibly make a policy when you have the wrong data? So I take it for granted because we use data that's taken right out of a system that's generated automatically like retail transactions. So I know it's 100% correct, but that's super critical. You can't make a theory or decisions if your data is not 100% accurate. The computing power today is so enormous. When I was in grad school doing my aerospace studies, I used to use an X286 at home, and I had one at my brother's house and one at my friend's house and one at the lab, and I used to drive around from location to location running my computational jobs, and that was what parallel computing was in the 80s, right? And so since then, I founded my company in 2003. Today, $1 million of equipment today would have cost $1.5 billion in 2003 and would have probably been like $1 trillion in 1980. So we can compute at incredible levels of granularity. So I see a comment on Wikipedia, if you look up economic models as I was thinking about this talk, and it said that you can't build granular enough economic models because of the intractability of computing. Well, I'd say the computing today exists to compute almost anything. I can build a model where I have every single house in Canada, every single business in Canada, and I can optimize what's the optimal place to put store locations so that it optimizes, the distance people have to drive to stores. I can take, 11 million household data points and the 2 million businesses and do that. That's trillions of calculations. We can do that today. And so we should use computing power. In the earlier talk about, letting humans make decisions on everything that government does, that's what computing allows today in technology, granularity, do things at a more granular level. This whole big data thing is a myth. It was invented by IT companies to sell data storage, right? Moore's law, that the cost of computing cuts in half every 18 months. Well, shouldn't the cost of hardware go down every 18 months? Shouldn't IBM stock go in half every 18 months? Well, somebody went big data, and then they all went, whew. So we're all collecting what we had for breakfast, how many molecules there are in the room at any instant, and so we can buy more hardware. But as I said earlier, you don't need a lot of data if you have the right theory. Scientific method that built everything in our lives, from the chair you sit in, the smartphones you hold, the computers you run on, was all invented by theory first, then find the right data to prove that your theory is accurate, and do that iteratively. That's the scientific method. That's been tried and true for 100+ years. Why have we all of a sudden thrown that out the window and are slaves to this myth of big data? Let's use the human brain like Einstein did and come up with fundamental theories to explain the systems that we want to model. That's the method we should be using. Forget the big data. Big data has its place in a narrow set of use cases, but let's go back to what works, what scientists have been doing for centuries. Next slide, please. And so, is technology contributing to populism? Absolutely. Some OECD stats that I pulled up, there's a large risk of jobs at risk of automation. There's polarization. Some of the low-level labor jobs and middle-level jobs are being replaced with technology. I think 50% of jobs in the US are retail clerks being automated. Should we do that? I don't know. Is it ethical to replace what human beings are good at? I don't think so. I think we should apply technology to do what people can't do. That's helping people. Next slide, please. Our mission at Daisy is to empower people to achieve their best. Let people do what people are good at. Let's not replace people with customer service robots. Let's not replace things that we're good at. Let's machines do what machines are good at. Machines can compute. Since the day a computer came out, it's been better at computing than people. Let machines do what machines are good at. Let people do what people are good at. And it's not only about profit maximization. It's not about maximizing profit in the economy. It's more than that. We need to maximize employment and keep people employed. So there's an ethics to the application of technology. Next slide, please. For people, if we use machine intelligence to make smarter decisions, so when I help Walmart grow their business by $1 billion, they don't bank that, they don't dividend it out, they reinvest it in price. They lower the prices because smart businesses know that when they lower price and invest in innovation, they grow market share. So if we help every company be smarter, every government be smarter, that's going to lower the cost of living for humanity. So our goal is to minimize poverty by creating a smarter, way more efficient world. That's how we should apply AI. Next slide, please. So I love Andrew Yang. I don't know about his policies a lot, but I like the thing, make humanity think harder. He says make Americans think harder, but make humanity think harder. I believe that citizenship shouldn't be only an emotional matter, which it is today. Citizens need to step up to their responsibility and evaluate their leaders and propose policies and plans and budgets rather than make emotional choices and get tied up in this rhetoric. Leaders have a real responsibility to make transparent their theory. If you think you can clean the environment by putting gigantic fans up in every city and cost $1 million a fan, and you're going to measure the carbon particulate levels, and that's your theory, then stand up and tell people that's what I'm going to do, that's how I'm going to spend your money, and I'm going to measure it and share it with you so that we as citizens can evaluate those rational choices. Some of the earlier questions today are what should we do? I think it's a leadership vacuum, and what Bob's doing at Lex, that's the leadership expedition. We need leaders. If you want to make a change, find the people in your lives who believe in what you do and tell them to become leaders, either in business or government. We need to be a virus from within the system to be responsible and do what business and government needs to do. So if you want to stand up, be an activist and find the people who are willing to change the world from within. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build the world's largest AI company, and we're going to be responsible as hell and change the world. Thank you very much.